So I know we have to introduce Matt, Jason, because, it's a bit of a sequel about a sequel. It's a sequel podcast. We're bringing back someone who joined us when we talked about the first film in this franchise. But first, I have to clear the air on the Dune sandworm popcorn bucket that we were.
I did not hear about this at all, and I am intrigued.
Yeah. Okay.
Please tell me more.
So what I want you to do now, Jason, is live while we're recording. I want you to Google the Dune popcorn bucket, and so you can be filled in. Wow, that's actually an unfortunate pun.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So there was a minor social media frenzy about this thing because seemingly I think it was an AMC Theaters product. They rolled this thing out and didn't seem to acknowledge what it looks like at all. And, TikTok and other platforms did what they would with it. And it became this sensation, and to the point where people were talking about it so much in the weeks leading up to Dune Part 2 coming out that they were actually asking the stars about it during the press junket. And, so we have there's videos out there of Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya and Florence Pugh all kind of commenting on the shape of this thing. So as a result, I kind of went to Cineplex. I was hoping that they had gotten their hands on some stock to sell to us when we all went to see the movie. And I was disappointed. We didn't have anything.
They didn't have it for sale, or you missed out?
They didn't have it for sale. It wasn't, mean, not at my theater. I don't know about you guys.
Typical Canada.
They do not know. They do not have it. It was not here.
So
I've never felt so full and so empty at the same time.
I was going to say it looks like a giant garburator, but I can see the implications now. This must be also, from a practical point of view, really hard to eat.
Yes, I think it was in a video with Zendaya and Florence Pugh. They were being asked about it in tandem, and they both pointed out that if you really think about trying to take popcorn out of the thing, it's probably going to grab just as much popcorn out of your hand on the way out. So I don't know. I mean, there's multiple problems with it, but
this is one of those marketing things where they'll claim it as a success because people are talking about it.
This is what makes my life as a person who works in marketing so impossible, is that I can try really hard and we can spend time and money, and we can try really hard to come up with a really great, holistic marketing plan. And we can push something and it can be well researched and targeted at our persona and all that stuff. But then somebody makes a popcorn bucket that you want to fuck. And it's our work has been completely overturned by everyone's this is amazing. I'm going to go see this movie because of that. It's kind of honestly, the Barbenheimer phenomenon, in that that was not really planned. It will never happen like that again. People will try, but it will never happen like that again. It's just my job is pointless when this is the type of thing that can happen.
Yeah. What is that? The wisdom of crowds? I don't know.
Absolutely.
There's So yeah, and for those of you listening, you probably guessed, there's a third voice joining us on this podcast. We don't always have guests here, but Jason, do you want to give a little intro to our esteemed Dune scholar?
Yes. So our guest today, his name is Matt Whalen. Hello, Matt.
Hello.
He is from Nova Scotia, or living in Nova Scotia, I should say. He's a college buddy of mine, big Dune fan. He was actually part of our episode on Dune Part 1, which was 3 years ago now, I think.
Which also was delayed a year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
just like this one was.
Yep. And it just made sense to bring him back because if you guys remember, in Dune Part 1, I kind of refused to give my full rating because I needed to see the second half.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to get a lot of different perspectives. And I know Matt is really well versed in the Dune sort of universe. I haven't read the books, but I know both of you guys either have read it or know a lot about it. So I can't wait to get into the episode because there's a lot to unpack. So I'm excited for this, and I hope we have some good discussion going.
Hold on. I thought we were talking about the 1992 DOS strategy game by Westwood Studios, Dune 2.
Oh no.
Well, we could. I wouldn't have a lot to say. Or are we talking about the Dune TV show adaptation that I don't think anyone ever saw?
Yeah.
We don't talk about that. It's like the RoboCop TV show. You ever see that?
I didn't even know there was a RoboCop TV show.
Made in Canada, baby. Filmed in Toronto.
Okay, that's how I know it's bad.
Well, should we run the intro?
Sure.
Welcome to the Extra Buttery Podcast. It's a show about movies, TV, anything with a story and actors on a screen, really. Join Jason Chan and Robert Snow's free-flowing conversation with deep dives into characters and plot with the occasional salty opinion. So get your popcorn, I got mine right here. Let's start the show!
Welcome to the 124th episode of the Extra Buttery Podcast. We have a special episode as we talked about in the cold open. I'm Jason Chen in Vancouver. Joining me as usual is Robert Snow in Toronto.
Hello.
And as we introduced previously, Matt Whalen in Nova Scotia. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. We're truly coast to coast today.
We are. Wait, is Matt just generally in Nova Scotia? Does he have no fixed address?
No, sorry. That's my fault. It's Halifax. Nova Scotia is just one big barren wasteland.
You're not wrong, and also there's one place in Nova Scotia, let's face it.
It's true.
Sorry, Cape Breton.
Is it Halifax or is it HRM though?
It's Halifax, just the technical name is the Halifax Regional Municipality, except no one calls it that.
We don't care about Dartmouth, do we?
I live in Dartmouth, actually. But Dartmouth is no longer a city. Dartmouth was amalgamated / annexed by Halifax in the 1990s, and there is still the mayor from that time. She's still alive. She's an old lady, and she has never given that up. She still talks about what a great betrayal that was, and
wow,
yeah, it's wonderful local politics. I wish honestly that she was like more of an old coot, but I feel like she's finally kind of given up a little bit, because she used to be a big Twitter personality, and now that Twitter is not as much of a thing anymore, she's kind of disappeared.
Oh.
Well, actually, on the same note, betrayals are a big thing in Dune, aren't they?
Whoa, yeah, nice segue.
Ooh, very good.
Rob, you go first. I know you want to wax poetic about this.
I just checked our respective Letterboxd scores, and I see that I'm coming in much more positive on this than either of you guys. You know, I gave it a full 5 out of 5. You both gave it a 4. So I'm feeling a little bit like this is a flashback to our first episode together 3 years ago, where I was very much in the yes camp on this, and you guys are a little bit more measured, but that's okay.
It's pretty typical though.
Yeah. I mean, I just remember like kind of basking in this movie as the credits rolled. Like, you know, it's not very often that a giant work of sci-fi gets put together in such a like loving way by somebody like Denis Villenueve.
Oh, let's give credit where it's due, and this movie does not get made like this by anyone today, I think, except for Villeneuve. I think he's the only person with the clout and the interest in sci-fi that's going to make a movie that's this complex, treats the audience like adults, doesn't try to make you doesn't try to sugarcoat it, doesn't try to tone down the weirdness too much, just enough. They tone down the weirdness enough, but like, let's face it, there are a lot of shots of a fetus in this movie, just in the 84 Dune. So it's like, you know, I give kudos, because just like the first one, I will say that all the pieces are there. Like the visuals are amazing again. I think the sound was even better in this one than it was in the first one, and that's saying something. Did you both see it in IMAX?
I did, yeah.
I did not. I saw it on AVX.
Oh, AVX, I feel like this was very loud, in kind of in a good way. I think it was the sandworm, when Paul first rides the sandworm, that scene in IMAX. I don't know about your theater, Robert, but my theater, it was incredibly loud, and it was a really, really cool experience, actually, because it felt it felt like much more of an experience than like any movie I've seen in a number of years, probably since honestly the first for Dune Part 1. It was a movie going experience.
like I know that Cineplex tries to sell those D-Box tickets, and Jason has talked about his hack before for like sitting in the row immediately in front of the D-Box seats to try to get a bit of the rumble without paying the elevated ticket price. But I mean, the IMAX speakers in my theater were just like shaking the seat as if I would like there were motors in the seat. Like it was just rumbling through everything, and I loved it. I remember thinking like, obviously 5 out of 5 is a high bar for any movie, and it does kind of imply that like something is a quote unquote perfect film, but I just couldn't think about couldn't identify anything in it that I would change. That's often a bar that I try to draw. Like, is there some tweak that I would make if I was making this movie? And I couldn't really think of any. There was, 1 or 2 questions I kind of had about certain decisions that Villeneuve had made, but I still came away with just like with that kind of rare feeling of like, yeah, this was, like you're saying, it's an experience. It's something that you don't see very often. So I felt it hit my admittedly lower standard for giving a 5 out of 5. But Jason, you're with Matt on this. Like, you're coming in at a 4. Like, what was your takeaway?
Why did you think it sucked, Jason?
I did not think it sucked. Okay, I think parts of it sucked. That's it.
Oh, okay. I was joking. Please do elaborate on that.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll get into. Okay, when I say sucked, I don't mean it was like terrible, but I felt like it could have gone in a different direction. I do think Villeneuve's take is very different from Lynch's take on Dune, especially in this second part. I'm a big unabashed fan of Lynch's Dune. I think it's a great movie. I love it. I know it gets bad reviews, but I think in retrospect, probably people hated on it a bit much. But I agree with a lot of stuff you said. I think aesthetically, it looks beautiful. I think it looks gorgeous. I think the sound design was great. Some of the casting choices, some of the story decisions, I probably would have went in a different direction, but that's kind of the beauty of sci-fi, is that you can interpret it different ways and focus on different things because it's such a dense story. I did come away feeling like I watched the 3-hour commercial for Dune 3, which kind of rubbed me the wrong way, partly because of Chani, and I think we'll get into her later. But coming after seeing both parts, I almost feel like I like the first part better.
Interesting. Okay.
I'm glad you said that, because I am also going to come down on the side of saying I left the theater and I said to my friends who I went with, I said, I'm not sure, but I think I might like Dune Part 1 better. But I said, yeah. I need to sleep on it. I need a few days. And I did. And unfortunately, I almost missed the remember in Part 1 when Part 1 came out and then it came out on streaming, like, was it days later, the same day?
Yeah, I think they did a day and date because it was in the middle of like lockdown.
Because it was the middle of lockdown, right? So I almost was pining for those days because I really wanted to go home and watch it again at home and maybe pause it and maybe look at a few things. But I think it came down to I mean, yes, I gave it whatever I gave, 4 stars or 4.5 stars. I loved it. It was excellent. It was everything I wanted a Dune movie to be. So I really don't have any big complaints about it. I like, as a person who has read at least the first book, and I also like the Lynch Dune, although I want to talk about that in a second. But I think it was like as good as it was going to be, and I agree with a lot of the choices. I think what it really came down to for me was I learned something about myself with this movie, which is I really like, especially in sci-fi, I really like world building.
Same.
And I feel like the first movie is all about, and actually Villeneuve has said this, he said it on The Tonight Show. He did an interview with Stephen Colbert, and he said, I felt like the first movie was me building the sandbox, and the second movie is me being able to play in it, which is kind of a clever thing. But I think actually I was like, oh, actually, can we get back to building that sandbox? Because that was the stuff I really enjoyed. I think more in the first one was tell me more about this world. Tell me more about how things work. Show me all the weird technology. Show me all that stuff. But in this one, it is more plot and character focused, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I just realized that I liked the first one better only because it had more of those things that I liked. I think there was, because most of the second movie is spent on Arrakis, in the sieges and things with the Fremen. It's mostly Fremen. I feel like I missed out on, like, I was like, oh, I want to see the Spacers Guild more. I want to see the spaceships. I want to see
Matt, you're speaking to me.
Good. See, Jason and I haven't talked about this yet, so this is all fresh. I wanted to see more, like, show me the shield technology. Show me, like, that's the stuff I really, really enjoy. So I think that was the only thing that I missed out on, was I didn't get enough of that stuff, the weird stuff that I really, really wanted. So that was the only thing that I was critical of, but it's not even, I mean, I wouldn't say like you can even really change that, because that's just the way the second part of the first book goes. That's the way that the second half of the David Lynch movie goes. That's what it is. The story is, the first half of the book is Paul coming to Arrakis and then the betrayal of House Atreides, and then the second part is Paul's rise to become Lisan al-Gaib or whatever. Like, he's becoming
Lisan al-Gaib.
He's becoming, this messiah character. And so it's like, they obviously didn't change that, although Villeneuve did make a bunch of interesting changes, both from the Lynch movie and the book, but I'm sure we'll talk about that as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's an interesting take, because I remember when the first one came out, there was a tranche of the people who watched it who were the flip of that, where they basically said that they felt that there was too much talking, too much world building in the first film, and they couldn't wait for the more action oriented second half. And so, yeah, I mean, you're obviously gonna get the full gamut there. I mean, I like both movies for what they contribute, because that they are two halves of a whole. And yeah, like he definitely made a few changes to, like, giving Chani a bit more agency, giving Lady Jessica a little bit more agency, like trying to gender swap a few things from the first film, things like that, which are all totally fine. Like, that's the kind of the exercise of adapting a novel, right? Yeah, when the action does hit in that final battle, like,
oh man, that was sweet. Honestly, that was great. Like, that was, I mean, I can't fault Lynch. He did what he could with what he had. He was never going to have that, like, the budget or the technology that Villeneuve has. So I can't compare the two, but I mean, yeah, I did rewatch Dune 84. There are a bunch of things that reminded me of that, but also, the final, like, the climax of the movie, there's no comparison. Obviously, this was so much better. Like, being able to see the atomics for the first time in, like, all their glory, and the Emperor's, like, glass, I don't even know what you call that, like, his glass, like, castle that he brings with him. That was a big something else. But Jason might not actually know what you mean when you say that the change of the Chani. So, Jason, do you know what he's talking about when he's talking about, like, the changes that were made to Chani's character? Yeah.
So Chani in the book is more like, she kind of goes along with whatever Paul does, right? Like, she's okay with him being married to Princess Arula and all that. In the movie, she becomes more skeptical of Paul, and I think that was one of my gripes between Paul and Chani, is that their relationship to me never felt really well defined. There was definitely a push and a pull there, and I felt that there was just too short of a time to really flesh out the relationship, even though we spent a lot of time with them. And I also think part of it is just because I don't think there's a lot of chemistry between the two leads.
Zero chemistry.
And Timothée Chalamet. Yeah, and, like, there's a scene where they're sitting on the banks, the banks of Dune, basically, and basically going through, like, this romantic drama moment together. And I couldn't buy it, because in the next few scenes, she starts really doubting him as this Paul Muad'Dib, this Messiah character. And the way the movie ends too, it sort of sets up, like I said, Dune 3, where Paul becomes like an anti-hero or villain, if you want.
In the book, you're supposed to read Paul as a villain, basically, not throughout, but I mean, once you realize what's happening. Frank Herbert is basically on record saying, like, yeah, Paul's the bad guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was his biggest gripe with Lynch in the original movie, was that Lynch made Paul like a pure messiah. He actually makes it rain on Arrakis. Whereas Herbert was like, no, he's not supposed to be the guy who brings peace and whatever. He actually brings more stability or less stability and more death and war to the rest of the galaxy, because he finally buys into this like prophecy. And actually that's one thing that I think Villeneuve does a lot better than Lynch, is that he fleshes out how this prophecy is actually fed to the Fremen by the Bene Gesserit.
Yes, yeah. And like by the time I think all of the counting is done in the larger Dune franchise, I think Paul is sort of on record for being responsible for like 63 billion with a B deaths.
Yep, that's right. Yeah.
So like that's just a like a unfathomable number of deaths, and like, you know, they like raise entire planets and stuff. Obviously Villeneuve is like, you know, he's trying to set the table for that, and maybe that's why you felt like this was an extended trailer for a film that may not come for like a few years, like even longer interval, you know?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I think Dune 3 has been talked about.
Yeah.
And I think given how successful this film has been, I would be shocked if it wasn't greenlit.
Yeah, I think Legendary Pictures, who are like the main production company, they've basically said that Villeneuve can come back and do it. But I think he said in a lot of press interviews that he's very tired from spending 6 years in the desert making these movies. And so he wants to make like a smaller, more like, you know, maybe something a bit more like, I don't know, Enemy or Prisoners or something, and then maybe go back to Dune 3 as his, you know, subsequent film after that.
That scares me a little, because Peter Jackson said the same thing about being tired of filming The Hobbit or like Lord of the Rings in the jungles in New Zealand, and he just left it all to CGI.
Yeah.
But I have more trust in Villeneuve than that. He really is like a sci-fi auteur to me. I don't think he'll go down that path because it's not in him.
I'm surprised he wants to make a third one, honestly. Like I remember I probably even said it. I didn't listen to our first episode together, but I remember thinking it at the time, hey, look, I hope the second one happens. But, you know, I was skeptical even then. But I mean, the way they ended it, I was like, okay, they have to make a second one. But for this, I'm with you, Jason. I'm not as sure. I mean, I've heard him be contradictory. Like, again, referencing his appearance on The Tonight Show, he was like, yeah, I want to make this third one. And he's like setting it up. But at the same time, it's like, you know, well, go see the second one. You know, maybe I'll make a third one. But I kind of can't imagine he'd want to do a third one straight away. And luckily, like with the story of the second book, I guess it might even be the second and third book, you can wait. You don't need to make it straight away. You can wait. You can have the Paul's sister be more of a character, which there's a big change from the first movie and the first book. She's not actually in this one, which I think was a good change. But yeah, I all in all, I am surprised that he's even kind of saying like, yeah, I want to make the third one. But I mean, who knows whether that's real or not. I do wish that he made this one a bit more complete. It's been a while since I've read the first book, but I don't feel like the first book ends quite like this does, but maybe it does. I mean, it definitely ends with he basically overthrows the emperor, and then it sets up that a holy war is coming because the houses of the Landsrat aren't willing to kind of bow to him, and then it just kind of ends there. But it did feel the second movie did feel like a lot more of a cliffhanger. Not as much as the first part, Dune Part 1, but it still felt like a bit of a cliffhanger and like, well, you know, James Bond will return.
Yeah. No, I felt exactly the same way. I just felt like there was a lot of setup. Part of the reason I like Part 1 more, as Matt said, is part of the politics and the world building. I felt there was a lot less of that in the second part. And I felt if you were going to tease Part 3, then maybe I would have liked to see, you know, the Spice Guild, the Navigators, Chom, the different houses of the Landsrat a bit more, because they kind of pass it or mention it in passing in the second part. And I wish they just expanded on it. There was a part in the middle where I felt it dragged a little. Do you guys feel that?
Not for me, but I mean, I know that the series, from what I've read about the books, you know, I've only read the first book, but I've read plenty of summaries of what happens in the subsequent books. And from like every subsequent movie that they make or every book that they adapt is going to get less and less commercial. It's going to get weirder and weirder, and there are going to be more and more politics and more and less action. So I feel like, you know, if they had, I don't know how far they can even take it without it being a complete flop, honestly.
They can't make that third book. They can't make that third book.
Is that God Emperor of Dune?
God Emperor of Dune, where
by the time Paul's son is like a sandworm hybrid, like you've lost a big tranche of the casual audience who are just going to see it for the sci-fi extravaganza.
Do you guys want to just get into the movie and some of the characters? Because I really want to talk about Chani.
Right. Well, yeah, let's talk about Chani, because like we've been saying, you know, they tweaked her a little bit to kind of make her into to have a lot more agency and respond a lot more directly to what she's seeing Paul become. Like, obviously she's skeptical of the whole prophecy that people like Stilgar are like promoting, but then, you know, she's also concerned with like what it means for her own relationship with Paul. So those are the two big ones.
So here's the thing. I definitely didn't buy the love story, but she flip-flopped so many times. It was kind of distracting.
Are you thinking about like the scenes where they go down to the southern pole of the planet and are like arguing about what to do?
Part of it, I just think that in one scene they're like professing their love for each other, and then the next scene she's kind of antagonistic towards him.
She doesn't want to be seen by her cool friends with the dorky Paul Atreides.
Yeah. It was kind of like, okay, are you in or are you out? Like, I can't have you flip-flopping both ways. I understand there's a conflict within you, but if I didn't buy the love story in the first place, then I'm definitely more in the camp of, okay, she really doesn't like Paul. And I feel like on some level, this movie still works if she and Paul didn't have that love story.
Okay, I hate to be this guy, but are they still dating in real life?
Oh, Zendaya's married to Tom Holland.
Oh, Tom Holland. See, I just swapped one waifish white guy for another waifish white guy.
Okay. So I actually kind of made the same mistake when I was watching the video. I was like, wait, aren't they like an actual real life couple? But I was like, oh, I remember now.
They met on Spider-Man. It was the other movie where they were co-stars. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right.
But I have heard that, and this is like purely based on internet speculation, was that Zendaya and Timothée Chalamet did not get along.
I buy that very easily. They have negative chemistry.
Doesn't that kill the movie a little bit for you though? Because it's such a central part of that movie, that relationship between those two.
I think that, like, you know, I don't necessarily need to be sold on the love story part of it, because I also know that, you know, if we're talking like how well Chani and Paul know each other, it's actually not that well. Like, he just crashes in the desert and then she kind of like picks him up and brings him back to her seat, right? So like, it's not like they have a lengthy like get to know you montage or anything.
But I think Paul forces it quite a bit because he dreams of her.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
And he kind of stalks her.
But does he dream of her because he actually loves her, or because of like the weird like Bene Gesserit stuff?
Doesn't he dream of her because he sees the future?
Yeah. So he's like, oh, well, I just have to make my future happen. So, and this girl's hot, so I'm going to...
Yeah, there's a bit of self-fulfilling prophecy in it. And that's what I think Villeneuve tries to get into in this movie.
That's the biggest kind of like thematic conflict of the book, which is like the blurring the lines between what is prophecy and what happens when someone can see the future and then, as you said, like make the choice to make that future happen. You know, it's like what is stopping Paul from making a different choice? And in the movie, they actually explore that a little bit. Like, he's like, I won't go south. I won't go south. I won't go south. Like, which is cool, because that's like a thing that's not even really even like mentioned as far as I can remember in the 84 movie. But it's a big part of this. He's like, he kind of plays at, I'm not going to live up to the prophecy. And then he does it anyway. And then...
That's a good point, because I feel like Paul in this movie turns quite quickly. So in the books, as I understand, he's in the desert for quite a while. Like, it's a few years past.
3 years.
In this movie, he does it all within a span of a year.
That's right. Yeah, that was a little bit of a struggle for me, like where like he changes his mind. But I also understand, like, look, you have to make narrative decisions. But I mean, since the first movie, honestly, I feel a little bit bad almost, which is I like Zendaya as an actor, but I think she was not a good choice. Like, I think she's miscast as Chani, and I've been saying it since the first movie, which is kind of funny because I believe that like almost all the other casting choices in the movie are pretty spot on. Although I will say, I don't want to jump ahead too much, but I don't know if I'm going against the grain by saying Christopher Walken as the Emperor was a bad choice. But
my God, I was going to mention that at some point. He's a living corpse. He can barely speak in this movie.
I don't mind the Padishah Emperor. I don't mind him being frail and old. I think that's kind of a cool thing because it's supposed to be like, you know, his time has passed and a new emperor will take over. I just really don't think that Walken was given the space to bring that part to life. And so if you're not going to give someone like Walken space, kind of like in like, I don't know, bad comparison, but like Walken in True Romance, like or Suicide Kings or something like that, where Walken can be Walken, like let Walken be Walken. And then in this movie, they don't give him like, what does he have? Like 6 lines? Like
apparently it was only a 3-week job for him. Like he flew to Budapest. It was mostly done on rather than like him actually being in the desert with everyone, because his scenes are all like, you know, shot on sets. So yeah, he was there for 3 weeks, and he took the job just because he thought, you know, it would be fun to do a sci-fi. I don't think he thought very deeply about it. He wasn't
also probably because he got paid a lot.
Well, yeah, but like I think, you know, if it's kind of like Anthony Hopkins and the kind of the work that he's been doing in the latter part of his career. Like, I mean, imagine you're in your 80s and somebody says, "Hey, do you want to be in a sci-fi film? We'll pay you millions of dollars to stand there and say a few lines while stuff explodes around you." Anybody would take that deal.
I wish it was Anthony Hopkins. Anthony Hopkins would have been a bet. Honestly, if someone can do something with 6 lines, it's Anthony Hopkins. No shit against Chris Walken. Like, I think Chris Walken's a great actor. I don't even want to say this because I feel like it cheapens the movie, like stunt casting. Because when I saw him on the cast list at the, like, when they announced it, I was like, ooh, cool choice. Like, that's a really oddball choice for the Emperor. And then it didn't really play out, but it's okay because it's such a minor part of the movie. But like, I mean, I was just connecting that too.
But it's important, don't you think?
It's important, but they downplay the Emperor a little bit in this. Like, I think they really play up Princess Irulan more. So, and Florence Pugh, I think, is a good choice. I think she was good in the limited amount that she's in it.
To your point, Matt, when Christopher Walken appears on the screen, he's not given enough time and space to become the Emperor. All you see is Christopher Walken.
Yeah.
He needs to ramp up. Somebody on Twitter, I think, said, because yes, I still use Twitter. Somebody on Twitter said that they felt like he was doing a like SNL skit of Dune, and I was like, okay, that's not fair, but at the same time, like, that's really funny because it is kind of true. I think you do cast somebody with a more kind of traditional gravitas instead, like Anthony Hopkins, although now I guess he was Thor's dad, or he was so like you can't really do that again, but cast somebody with some kind of like more traditional gravitas, and I think it works out a little bit better. But as I was saying, my only actual, I guess, complaint is I unfortunately think Zendaya was just not like either not well cast or just Villeneuve didn't know how to direct her. I do not blame her at all. I think it's one of those two things though, and maybe too, like you said, like if her and Chalamet just couldn't get along, it's like it's really hard to, because I agree with Jason, like I think the romance subplot didn't really work for me, and so it's like, oh, that's a key component of the movie missing. But even with that, it's like there's so much in terms of, I don't want to complain all about casting, because like a lot of the new cast was really great. Like I really liked Austin Butler. I thought he was good.
Oh, I want to get into him.
We will.
Okay, good, because his impression of Skarsgård was awesome.
I also, just a quick point about Princess Irulan, she kind of serves the same purpose in the 1984 film, where she's just providing
exposition.
Through her exposition
diaries.
For the plot. Yeah, through her diaries. And I feel like she would play a bigger role in Dune 3, obviously, as the wife of Paul Atreides.
That would be neat.
I think the part with Princess Irulan in this film, though, is she acts as kind of like a mirror to the character, the Bene Gesserit, played by Léa Seydoux, because
again, she's in it for 30 seconds.
You see, so what you see is like, you see how like Irulan is trained by the Bene Gesserit. She's kind of like watching over the Emperor and kind of keeping him in thrall to the Bene Gesserit by being his right hand. And then you've got Léa Seydoux. She's assigned to go and seduce Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen and kind of get him under the auspices of the Bene Gesserit. So you've got all of these like Bene Gesserit witches like placed in all of these very key locations, and that's very much their MO, is like being infiltrated into all of these galactic affairs, if it means like sleeping with them or being the daughter of one or whatever. And they just, they kind of twist the screws, and you kind of see, Princess Irulan obviously represents maybe a more positive interpretation of that. She's less calculating in this movie, whereas the Léa Seydoux character is obviously doing, she's exerting like the more negative type of influence. You see her just fulfilling the mission in a very mercenary kind of way.
Is Irulan supposed to be a big player though?
I don't know.
I never got the feeling that she was, either in the books or the original film. She was more there as like an audience proxy.
Yeah.
She kind of gets pulled into this without any real agency of her own.
There's an implication where, like, she goes to join up with the Reverend Mother, played by Charlotte Rampling. She goes for a meeting with them, and Léa Seydoux's character has come back from Giedi Prime, and so they're all kind of getting together, and they're sort of like, this is the plan, right? Like, Irulan, you keep an eye on the Emperor, whatever Léa Seydoux's character, you did a good job on Giedi Prime, like, good. So you get this sense that, like, they're a cabal, and, like, even if Irulan doesn't really believe in it, she obviously cares a little bit more for her father than some of the other witches do,
and she cares for the outcome as well, whereas as like Léa Seydoux's character is more like basically just doing Charlotte Rampling's like the Reverend Mother's bidding.
Yeah, exactly.
Basically the only person in the whole story, at least in this version of the story, the only person in the story who's really not working for the Bene Gesserit in one way or another is Paul. And in a way he kind of is, but he's also doing his own. But here, I've really found they did a good job where he breaks away a lot more from Jessica in this one.
I think he tries. No,
he tries for sure, but I think he sort of at least half successfully does it. But then she's doing her own thing with the whole like water. What is it? The water of life or whatever.
I thought she was great in this movie. She was one of my favorite characters in this
Rebecca
movie.
Ferguson was awesome. She somehow made the whole talking to my fetus thing not corny. Which that could have gone.
Unlike Zendaya and Timothy Chalamet's dialogue with each other.
Well, at least they I was waiting for somebody to be like, I don't like sand. I don't like sand, Chani. But
that's the one thought I had in my mind. I was like,
but
I'm waiting for that Natalie or that Anakin Skywalker sort of meme to come out. I hate sand.
Imagine not Rebecca Ferguson playing that role, and like she's like, what's that baby inside me? It's like, oh man, that could be so bad. But
are we having like Nicki Minaj played like?
But they did such a good job, honestly, with, and I think I might have even said that first time we talked, which is like one of the strengths that Villeneuve has is taking this really weird sci-fi book from the 1960s and written by a certified weirdo, Frank Herbert, and making it palatable for like the popcorn munching masses, which is not necessarily always something that you actually want to do, but actually doing it so that they'll see it, but then still making it serious and adult enough so that like nerds like us can still enjoy it as well. Like what a fine line to walk. And she's part of that whole calculus of like of playing a serious, like an unserious story almost, but playing it very seriously and doing a really good job.
Now that you kind of talk about it, so some of the technology that I was kind of looking forward to in Dune Part 2 was kind of ignored. Like, do you guys remember the weirding modules, the shields and stuff? That was strangely ignored in Part 2. Like, I rewatched Part 1, and it was actually a big part of the movie. And in 1984, the weirding module is a huge part.
I think he just did away with weirding modules altogether, did he not?
Yeah, why is that? Like, I guess it is a director's choice, but I wonder why that is. It's just too weird or just boggles down the story too much, because I felt like that was one of the reasons why the Fremen, taking over the planet was so plausible, was because they had this great weapon that, they could destroy worlds and galaxies and whatnot.
Maybe it's just like the template of like a Lawrence of Arabia style upraising, the idea of like a underpowered faction being able to take on a much more powerful force through like guerrilla warfare and all that, because they have like an inspirational leader, whereas the Harkonnen are like, they just everything is done through fear. I guess that's the fear is the mind killer after.
And I mean, I guess there's also the atomics and the big sandworms too, but like I get the general premise is that they want to focus on Paul's story as the potential messiah and this gather of people. Speaking of which, Stilgar in this movie was excellent. I think he was the one character I think is miles better than the 1984 version.
If you had asked me, or if you had tested me like, a few months out from this and said like, oh, do you think Stilgar is going to be a comedy genius? Would not have guessed that. I know he didn't mean any of the stuff as to be funny, but like it's clear that Villeneuve means it as like a comedy bit. So
they needed that though.
That's it. It's like, again, the genius of, not all credit to Denis Villeneuve, like obviously Javier Bardem is a great actor and a very funny actor. I'd like to now see him in like more comedies and stuff, but is because his timing is excellent. But again, the genius of a good director, like it's if you ever want to show somebody like the difference in having a good director, it's like show them this movie. It's like you put this in the hands of a different director, and they're going to be like too serious with it, and they're not going to have jokes because they're going to be like, oh well, this is it's too serious a story, and people won't take it seriously. You can't have a sci-fi movie too many jokes, and someone like Villeneuve is like, nah, it's okay to have a funny character. He's not a clown. He's just a guy. He almost actually plays him very similarly to Dave Bautista's character in Guardians of the Galaxy. It's like he's just kind of doesn't really understand things, and so he just says whatever's on his mind, and it's hilarious.
Yeah, he's just straight up,
What did you guys think about Robin, and Fade Rautha?
I'll touch on Robin first. I think it's a credit to Dave Bautista that I actually felt a little bit bad for Robin, despite everything that his character obviously perpetrates against the Fremen, and he's called the Beast Rabin, all that stuff. Dave Bautista is a good enough actor that like, when he's getting kicked around by Fade Rautha, and then later when Gurney Halleck like stabs him, I was like, aw. So I can't explain that, but anyway.
That's a good point, because again, I agree with you. I think that Bautista, great from the first movie. I think he's an actor. I am very excited to see kind of what's gonna keep happening with him. Like ever since I saw him in Blade Runner, I was like so good at Blade Runner with those little. I want those little glasses. But so good. He was great in this, and I agree. Like the sympathy you have for Beast Robin, you're like, how is this possible? It's the looks that he gives. I can't explain it, but it's the little looks that he gives. Like where there's a look that he gives, like Josh Brolin, like where he's like fighting him, and you're like, why would he fight him? He should know he's going to lose. And part of it is like, you could look at that and say like, well, Beast Robin is a creature driven by bloodlust. But I believe honestly in the way that Bautista played him is that he knows if he doesn't, that he'll just be killed anyway by the Baron. So like he's not allowed to disappoint him. So he has to fight Gurney Halleck, even though he knows he's going to be killed. It doesn't matter.
It sounds a little weird to say, but there's a bit of innocence in Dave Bautista's Robin, where he's like, there is a pure character who is driven to serve House Harkonnen and doing it the only way he does. And he's completely flabbergasted that his way doesn't work. And so he starts acting out like a child almost.
Yeah.
Well, he is a child. Yeah, he's very. They made a decision to play him as like a childlike monster, basically. Which I thought was an really interesting choice, which contrasts really well with, and I know you said earlier we can talk about him, and finally it feels like now we can. It contrasts really well with Austin Butler and Fade Rautha, who was somebody that after the first movie, I remember my friend, he's a big, I guess maybe a big Sting guy, but he was like, man, I can't wait to see who they're going to cast as Fade Rautha.
Okay, so on that note, we can go into Austin Butler more, but Lynch's House Harkonnen is very different from House Harkonnen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like visually, like to me, the Lynch one, they're brutal, right? They're disgusting. There's everything.
Way more sadistic.
Yeah. Everything about them is just disgusting, immoral, sadistic. This Harkonnen is more haunting. Like there's no like pus coming out of their pores. They're almost like a very clean black and white look. And it's almost as if they're not there to, take a sledgehammer to everything, but definitely a bit more calculating. I thought that was a really interesting artistic decision by Villeneuve. And I don't know, I feel like the 1984 version, the more sadistic one, makes them more feel like a bigger villain to me. And therefore, when Atreides triumphs them, it feels like a bigger victory.
I mean, I see where you're coming from. I I still feel that the Harkonnens in the Villeneuve films are frightening, though. I mean, they're far more frightening than like even the Sardaukar troops, where we're told that the Sardaukar are the like elite fighting force that everyone is afraid of. But like, I'm more freaked out by the creepy leather bound, monsters that are just crawling around in the shadows on Giedi Prime than I am of any Sardaukar.
So after I was leaving the movie with friends, I said, can we talk about those like hammerhead guys that they have in the arena scene where the like guards that are guarding the sides of the arena?
Yeah,
those guys were so scary looking. But that really cool visual style.
That scene where they're fighting, or Fade Ratha's fighting the Gladiator Stadium, one of the most aesthetically pleasing things I've ever seen.
Do you know how they got that stuff?
How?
It's infrared footage.
Oh, really? Okay. Because at one point it reverses, like the blacks and whites reverse.
Yes, so that's why the shadows on their face don't look quite right, because if it was just a color image or even a camera that had been turned to like black and white mode, the shadows would still look more recognizable, but everything was like way more washed out and everything. And so what Greg Fraser, the cinematographer, did was he and Villeneuve were talking about like, all right, what's the look for the exterior of Giedi Prime? We've obviously seen the inside of their buildings in the first movie, but what does it look like when they're actually out in the air? And so Villeneuve said, well, I want something that's got incredible like contrast and just shows how binary their society is. And so Greg Fraser was like, well, what if we did it with infrared? Because that's a really weird look that like, that nobody's really seen before in that kind of sequence. And it involved them basically committing to that look from the very beginning, because once you shoot with infrared, there's no getting any color information back. So it was kind of like a big gamble on their part to shoot such an important sequence with that type of camera and like, just say like, yeah, that's the look we want.
It's an incredibly striking look and very freaky for sure. And I would like to see some of the behind the scenes footage of that shot on like regular cameras, because I know that like you can't the makeup and things aren't going to be done the same way. You're not going to light it the same way, because everything works differently when you're shooting like in infrared. So it would be very interesting for me to see like some of the behind the scenes stuff on that. But it makes everybody look just that much more. I agree. Like it's like almost like an uncanny valley thing going on. It just makes everything look a bit. It just sets you at like ill at ease. Like I see where you're coming from, Jason. I agree with you in the sense of they are the Harkonnen are more like openly like mustache twirling villains, sadistic in the first one.
Yeah, they're all gingers. That was always an interesting choice.
That's funny. And it's like the scene when he's like by milking this smooth little cat every day, you stay alive from the poison. And I was like, that stuff is cool actually, because it's just like it goes really well.
It's the world building part.
Yeah, and it goes really well with some of the Harkonnen stuff from the books. And in this, they skip over that more so. They do have a little bit of it because it's like Fade Ratha has those like women, his like, I don't know if they're like supposed to be like concubines or what, but they're the women who like are like cannibals that he feeds people to. And like that was really like weirdly disconcerting, and they don't shine a spotlight on that at all. And they have in the first movie, they have that weird spider creature and stuff like that. So like they do have some stuff, but I think the change, I do agree with Robert that I think the change is mostly good to this version, because they're evil without being like, as I said, like mustache twirling villains. They're a bit more complex, but they're still obviously, very evil. And I have to say, the last thing about the like Giedi Prime, again, me and the group that I went with, we all like gushed about the whole Giedi Prime sequence. We loved that. I think that was one of my favorite parts of the movie. But the Giedi Prime fireworks, those like awesome little ink blots, I thought those were really cool. That was a really like interesting choice that somebody made. Like, like let's do these like what look like little like ink explosions underwater. Those are their fireworks, like the least, like the most underwhelming fireworks ever. It very much fits with like Giedi Prime in terms of everything's black, everything's toxic, everything's poison. The planet just seems so hostile to life. There's nothing alive except for the Harkonnen and everybody else. Everything else is artificial.
What did you guys think of some of the death scenes? So the way Baron Harkonnen dies is very different from the 1984 movie and this one. Thufir, unfortunately, like I don't even recall seeing him in part 2.
He's not in part 2. They did film scenes with him and they cut it all out completely.
Right. So
unfortunately,
what poor character. I kind of liked him.
Yeah, I really like that character. Yeah, and I like just before we start recording there, I was talking about I really like that actor as well, and it's too bad that he got cut out. But at the same time, the movie is like 2 hours 40 minutes, so got to cut something.
Yeah, agreed.
And really, I mean, his story in the book and the movie is just he's captured by the Baron and they torture him. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, it's good, but you can stand to lose it, unfortunately.
He's also only in like one scene in 1984 Dune.
He's a little bit more in the book in the sense that like he's a part of the story because they're like torturing him to get information about like the Atreides and stuff like that. But I think it's a relatively good change, or like it's at least, if you've got to cut somewhere, I'm glad they cut that. Although I think some might argue it's like, well, why not cut the Léa Seydoux scenes? But I like those because I like Léa Seydoux a lot, and I thought that her like a femme fatale character, like seducing Feyd-Rautha and like kind of like infantilizing him a little bit. A, that was hot, and B, I was like, I thought that it was a good like narrative choice as well, because it's like even somebody he's a monster like Beast Robin and Baron Harkonnen, but he's also really clever and calculating like Baron Harkonnen. So he's a really like interesting mix between the like he's like physically lethal like Beast Robin and he's like mentally lethal like the Baron. So I thought that was but it's like his weakness is well, he has other weaknesses, but what does she say about him? But he's like
sexually immature, or
yeah, something like that.
Sexually exploitable, something like that. Like I thought that was like good. That was, but and the fact that it's done by literally, like, well, not literally, but like the like embodiment of the femme fatale, I thought was cool too. People did kind of drag Villeneuve for that. They were like, oh, he just like, it's an excuse to put a sexy French woman in a movie. And I was like, and you are complaining because like this movie has plenty of sexy dudes in it. Like there's plenty of that. Like Javier Bardem is sexy in this movie. Like Austin Butler's sexy in this movie. Josh Brolin to an extent is sexy in this movie. But so it's like, Léa Seydoux, that's the trade-off. That's what you get.
Yeah, the bad guys get a few sexy ones too.
What about the scene where Paul kills the Baron rather than Aaliyah or anyone else?
Oh yeah, well I took that. I noticed the change as soon as it happened, and I took that kind of as a way of Villeneuve saying like the Baron has had everything taken from him. Like he's had his potency as like a warlord completely stripped away. Paul has utterly defeated him, and Paul doesn't even have to exert any effort to kill him. He can just walk up to him and kill him like an animal.
He makes that comment too, right?
Yeah, says you die like an animal.
Exactly. So like there's nothing more like emasculating or more complete of a defeat for the Baron to be killed in that way, rather than in some blaze of glory. And it also just it kind of reinforces the fact that Paul's ultimate battle is not with the Baron, but it's going to be with the Landsraad. So
right, yeah. Yeah, and like he has to overcome the Emperor, which his plan is foolproof for that. But no, I agree with you. I think the death of Baron Harkonnen I think is fitting because it's like it's not some big glorious death. His ability to fly has been taken away, and he just walks up and just stabs him in the neck. And it's like I tried to figure that out. The whole like he's like you die like an animal, and I didn't get it at first, and a friend who I went with to it said, and I think I saw this echoed on Twitter somewhere afterwards, but people think that is a reference to the Gom Jabbar and stuff, like because it's like a test whether you're a human or an animal. So they think that's some kind of reference to like Paul saying like you die like an animal. I'm not really sure about that. I mean, I guess you could interpret it any way you want. I think I agree with you, Jason, more. It's more just like he's bleeding him like you would like bleed a cow. This is how much respect I have for you as like a human being. So yeah, that was cool.
Even though he refers to him as grandfather in that moment.
I thought they'd make more of that point because I think they made a point of that in part 1, but it was just like in a passing conversation where Baron has the conversation with Helen Mohiam, where they talk about the plot to like overthrow House Atreides. That was always interesting more part of like the Bene Gesserit world building sort of manipulation part of that I wish they got into. I think because I've seen the first original movie and know the book a little bit, if you went in blind, the Bene Gesserit stuff was a bit hard to follow, no?
Well, I will say that I didn't rewatch the first half in the lead up to this. So like the last time I saw it was like 3 years ago. I did feel a little bit like I was playing catch up in certain scenes where I was thinking like, okay, hang on, wait, what? And I was, going through my like memories of reading the book 3 years ago as well and all that. And so, I mean, it didn't take me very long to catch up, but then, yeah, I see your point though. Like there are places where you might benefit from a second viewing of the movie, or you might have to do a bit of research afterwards to kind of like make all the linkages, because he's not putting a whole lot of it in exposition.
Yeah, it is very dense, right? So I understand if Villeneuve is only focusing on certain points. The Landsrat and the Spice Guild and Chom, I was a little disappointed didn't get more into that.
Basically not mentioned at all in part 2, other than saying like, hey, we called the Landsrat on the phone and they're gonna be here.
Yeah,
they're gonna be here while you overthrow the Emperor. And then like they get a phone call from them and they're like, oh yeah, they're not going for it, Paul. I'm sorry. It's gonna be intergalactic war. Honestly, that's how I felt about it. That's not that it's essentially weak, because that is the story. I mean, there's no way to dress that up. But I felt that a bit. The end felt a little bit rushed.
Yeah.
I was ready for the movie to be over, so it was fine, but I felt the end of the movie to be a little bit rushed in that I don't think that table is set particularly well. That's like, I think I agree. I think the audience is maybe not prepped for the stakes for what Paul is doing. Like if it was a TV series, they would set up the whole like politics game way more. Like I'm currently watching Shogun right now. Shout out to FX's Shogun. And they're doing a really great job at like, talking about the politics of feudal Japan and why decisions have to be made in the way that they are. And that's something that they don't have. Even with 2 movies with a runtime of like, nearly 6 hours, they don't have time. And that's why I'll reiterate again. I think that Dune could work really well as a limited series or something, because I agree with you, Jason. Like is the word chome even said maybe once or twice in the first movie, but it's not said in the second one at all.
Yeah. I think it's briefly mentioned part 1, because I did rewatch it leading up to this podcast. But even the fact that spice is what runs the galaxy isn't really touched on in part 2.
No, not at all.
Part 2 is more concerned about Paul fulfilling this so-called prophecy, and the spice comes second. Well, really, this all starts because of spice.
The Fremen are not supposed to be quite as like low tech and like as desperate as they seem in actually both versions of the movies, both the 1984 Dune and this, where they're like much more as Robert said, like guerrilla fighters, very like Mujahideen-esque, but they are like, they control a significant supply of spice, and they bribe the basic guilds, they bribe Chom, they do all kinds of things. Like they have much more power than the movie kind of gives them credit for, and that's none of that can really be again, I'm not criticizing the movie. You can't talk about any of this stuff. There just isn't time. So yeah, you get to the end of the movie and it's like, I think that it will be the weakness of the third movie, where I think a really, really excellent Fellowship of the Ring style introduction will have to take place at the beginning of a hypothetical third movie, because people aren't going to understand, okay, why? Who's at war now? I thought Paul won. Like, didn't the Emperor totally get, cast aside? Like, by marrying Princess Rulin, like isn't Paul like master of the universe now? And it's like, no, like you don't get what the Landsrat and how powerful all these other like parts of the piece are. And to me, because that's just the stuff that I like, is that's the stuff I really, really I get up in the morning for. So I feel like that was a little bit of a thing at the end of the movie, but again, I don't think they could have made any other choices. So like the ending was like satisfying to me, like overall, like the fight between Paul and Feyd-Rautha was good, and it was a like satisfying kind of conclusion to Feyd-Rautha's story as well. I thought he was good throughout.
I probably would have swapped a Timothée Chalamet Zendaya desert scene for more space guild.
Sure, I'll take it. I'll take it. I just look, you know what I wanted to see more of, which we didn't get, which is in the first movie. It's the guys in orange helmets.
Yeah, those are navigators, aren't they?
Exactly. I was like, oh, those are guild navigators. I was like, okay, I want to see more of those, because that was what I thought was a really cool design for guild navigators. Nope, we don't get any of that in this one. I was like, man, like, no. So yeah, no guild navigators, no worms in tanks, or like alien, like what the in 1984 Dune, the guild navigators are like basically like monsters like living in tanks.
Yes, yeah.
The worm things. This conversation never happened.
What about you, Rob? Did you feel like you were missing part of that, or
Not especially, because I remembered the book, and I remember how the it builds to this massive climax where all of the politics kind of drop away in that big actiony kind of portion, and then it obviously resumes at the very end of the story, because all right, the battle's over, but it's just the first battle of a huge war, and so you get that sense of like, okay, this scope is expanding now. And so I got that from this movie, where I was like, okay, you see the little like thrusters of the ships kind of landing on Arrakis, or approaching Arrakis. You're like, okay, there's other forces at play here. There's maybe if we had seen, like, if we had gotten a sense of like just how powerful the Landsrat is, like see how many ships they have, or how many troops they have, and you're like, oh, okay, like we saw all the millions of Fremen in those scenes, you know, in the southern hemisphere of Arrakis. Like, we know how many people Paul commands, but like, how does that stack up against, you know, the forces that are coming for him? You know, that would kind of set the table a little more. I don't know, but then would that make you feel like it was too much of like a Marvel style join us next week kind of thing?
Well, I think it doesn't have to be that, but I think you very easily can fall into that trap very, very, very easily of like, oh, now it's just a big battle with a bunch of guys, and I think that's, yeah, I agree with you. I think that's something that is you want to kind of stay away from. And I think also you want to be careful, like, well, just be careful in case a third movie doesn't get made, or, you know, even worse, I guess, like in case a third movie gets made but it's not made by Villeneuve.
that would be a nightmare.
Yeah.
It's like, oh no, and then it's like a movie that's a third movie we have to forget, you know, like a third movie where that we just like pretend doesn't exist. So it's like I did enjoy at the end of part 2 when all the Fremen get on the ships and they're like, yeah, we're going to the water planet, and I'm like, you guys have no idea what you're in for.
So the ending scene with Chani basically breaking away from Paul and riding the sand with him to the desert, where she basically goes back to where she comes from. You guys were satisfied with that? I thought that was a really nice scene to end on.
Yeah.
Yeah, the change, I really liked it. But again, I'm with Matt. Like, it was a little bit of a miscast, so it didn't hit all the feels for me. But I like the way they changed that in the end, where Chani just doesn't kind of go along, and she gets pissed off when Paul proposes Irulu and marry each other for political purposes.
Like, it's almost like she was willing to follow him through pretty much anything except up to that. That was kind of her red flag, you know, as to use a common parlance.
Yeah, she was starting to doubt him because he had really, really bought into this prophecy.
After saying, no, I don't believe it. It's not, that's, you know, that's not going to be me. That's not going to be me. And then he does it, and he's like, well, you know, you understand, just for a little while.
Yeah.
Just for a little while.
Yeah.
I think that was a good change, like, from the book and the movie, because in both, in like the story, she gets, like, because her character is very smart, and she does get like politically why he has to do what he does, and so she goes along with it. But in this, I think they do a good job at making her, it's not like she's stupid and she's like, oh, I can't believe he loves her instead of me. It's not that. She understands what he's doing, but she's more disappointed that he's fallen for his own myth.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really have anything to do with, maybe a little bit to do with, she's not jealous per se. She's like, okay, that's it. Like, if he's doing this, then he's completely, like, you know. So that, if they do ever make a third one, it would be interesting to see what happens. Although I feel also now that they've left the door open, they're like, okay, great, we can write Zendaya out of the third movie, and we can save ourselves $20 million. And you know, because I'm like, oh man, the obviously the cast for this movie, you know, everybody wants to work with Villeneuve now because he's you know, one of the big exciting directors in Hollywood, which is great. But man, just looking at the cast system, like the money alone that just has to get spent on cast before we ever shoot a single frame is kind of out there. But
okay, so one final thing before we kind of wrap things up: Timothy Chalamet as Paul Atreides or Kyle MacLachlan? I have a strong preference.
So do I. Robert, you go first, because
when Kyle MacLachlan's Paul Atreides fully comes into his powers in Dune 1984, there's a force behind his performance that I think is missing a little bit from Paul Atreides as done by Timothy Chalamet. Like in some weird kind of alternate universe where Kyle MacLachlan was the right age to be in this one, would that have been a better movie? A connected question: would you prefer to see Sean Young as Chani in a Villeneuve movie, assuming that the ages were correct?
So in both cases, I do prefer Kyle MacLachlan and Sean Young.
Okay, so no, I'm on the other side. I think the casting of Chalamet is on the whole better than Kyle MacLachlan. Nothing against Kyle MacLachlan. I think he's a great actor. I think he's not the right casting for a number of reasons. Chief among them is that Paul is supposed to. I'm not expecting them to cast a 15-year-old. So, but Paul is supposed to be 15. And like, what are they gonna do? They cast that freaky looking kid who they cast in Ender's Game.
Oh yeah, is that Asa Winterbottom?
Asa Butler? Is it Asa Butler?
Yeah,
it's Asa something. Whatever his name is.
No, it's Asa Butter something. Butterfield.
Whatever. Anyway. They could have honestly they could have cast that kid, because I bet you he was on somebody's list somewhere, because he's still kind of the right age, but he's got the right look, and he is more childlike. So I think Chalamet does a good job just by looking what he looks like and acting what he acts like, where he does a good job at being a little bit of a kid, more so than Kyle MacLachlan, who obviously is like a man in his 20s. Not just the age of the actor.
It was also Kyle MacLachlan's first movie, was it not? Like he really didn't have a lot of experience on camera when he shot Dune 1984.
That said, though, I do agree with you both in that I think when Kyle MacLachlan does come into his powers, I believe him a lot more, and he has this weird again, having rewatched it recently on Netflix, the Kyle MacLachlan has this weird, I'm a little scared of him. He has this weird thing where I'm just like, he becomes a weird sociopath, and that is what you're supposed to think of Paul. Like, Paul is supposed to be he loses, quite literally in the third book, he loses his humanity. That's what he's supposed to be. And actually, I think Kyle MacLachlan does a much better job. Chalamet tries, because he uses the voice more, and he's supposed to be more commanding, but I'm just like, he doesn't quite get there. So, but I mean, that all of that said, I think Chalamet is the better choice, and I'm not a big Sean Young guy, so it's like I think that as much as I think Zendaya was overall miscast, I think still better casting than Sean Young would have been.
I agree with both of you. I think Kyle MacLachlan has that emotional maturity at the end of the movie that Timothy Chalamet is missing, and a part of it is being older. And in another universe, if Kyle MacLachlan plays like a talented Mr. Ripley kind of serial killer, I think that's perfect for him. And that's kind of the feel you want with later Paul Atreides.
I will say, though, one casting choice I would have been all for is if they had found a way to bring Patrick Stewart back.
Oh, yeah. As Gurney Halleck.
Oh, as Gurney Halleck again?
No, I see what you're saying.
Who would he play?
Literally, he could play. Honestly, he could play anybody.
Thurfer.
Sure. One of the Mentats. Yep, he could play one of the Mentats. I think he could have been Duke Atreides, honestly, because I think even the older, Duke Atreides is supposed to be handsome and vibrant, so I think maybe not. But I think Patrick Stewart is handsome. But I think Patrick. I was kind of joking when I said it initially, but now I'm all in on my own narrative here. I'm like, no, bring Patrick Stewart back to do something. Did either of you hear? I actually heard this on another podcast where they were talking about Dune. It was We Hate Movies, and they were talking about the 1984 Dune. Did you hear the whole thing with how Patrick Stewart got cast in the original movie?
No.
So Patrick Stewart got cast in the 1984 Dune because he said, I want Patrick Stewart for this role. So they went and cast Patrick Stewart in the role, and then he saw Patrick Stewart on the first day of filming, and he turns to his casting director. He's like, "That's not." Who's that? Who is this guy? And he's like, that's Patrick Stewart. And he's like, that's Patrick Stewart? So like Patrick Stewart got cast quite literally by accident. And Patrick Stewart, this comes from, he must have said it on a talk show or something, but Patrick Stewart knows and found out that he was cast by accident. Turns out there was another actor at the time named Patrick Stewart, because again, this is 1984, well before Patrick Stewart was any kind of a film or TV star. So because this is a few years before Next Generation. And so there was another actor that Lynch saw or heard of or something. And it's like, who the hell is this other Patrick? Anyway, that guy never had any kind of a career, and Patrick Stewart has had this career. So it's just hilarious that was a complete accident. And I mean, they were kind of hypothesizing, and I wonder, I don't know, by 1984, I feel like they were at least conversations were already taking place about Next Generation. So who knows? But it's like, does Patrick Stewart have the same career if not for Dune? And it's like, it's like a big what if.
Wow. Anyway, so is there anything else you guys want to talk about before we give our final thoughts?
No, I mean, other than the fact that like I'm very curious to see what they do with a follow-up movie whenever that comes, if it comes. I mean, it's a big question mark for me, but I mean, I'm very glad that we have this completed 2 films set now, and I can't wait to get the 4K Blu-ray and watch it a whole bunch. I've been trying to stock up on physical media a little bit more recently with all of the stuff getting deleted from streaming services and stuff like that. So this is an all-timer for me that I have to own.
Well, if you're into like picture and sound quality, physical media is still better.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's just a question of storage space.
Yes. Well, my partner has decided to start up her physical media collecting again on the Blu-ray side of things. So this will I will push for ownership of this one. I think the thing for me that I wanted to touch on really quickly to get your thoughts on, because I know that it was something I thought about and talked about after this one, is did you feel like the score in the second one was minimalized compared to the first one?
Yeah.
That was a thought I had as I was leaving the theater. I was like, I really didn't notice, like, because I love the score of the first movie. I still listen to the first one quite a bit, and the second one, I'm like, nothing really. It was more background noise for me. I honestly didn't notice the second one nearly, like the score in the second one nearly as much.
I think part of it has to do with the world building. So much of the music sets the mood for the first movie, because a lot of it's like set in darkness. Whereas in the second movie, it's desert and there's a lot of sunlight. After I watched part 2, I came home and watched 1984, and that soundtrack by Toto was awesome. And it was one of the first thing I noticed. I was like, wow, the soundtrack is really prominent in Toto, in the 1984. And then I think back about part 2, and I was like, I didn't really notice the music that much. In fact, it was mostly like the silence I noticed the most about part 2.
Yeah, no, it was that they made different choices maybe. And again, it's something that like Robert said, I'll have to rewatch that and pay more attention to that. Like, obviously it's like not a question of availability or budget or anything. It's obviously a choice made to have a lot more like silent scenes. But I maybe you're right, Jason. Maybe it is because there's not as many like sweeping landscape shots, so showing a bunch of things like in the first one. So yeah, I just felt like the score was a bit more missing from this. Not necessarily criticism, just something I noticed.
For Denis Villeneuve, he's got like an excellent sci-fi library. Where do you guys feel Dune is, like, in terms of like his work? I know this is always like just a fun exercise in ranking his sci-fi movies, because there's a lot of good ones out there.
Yeah, that's
because to me, Arrival is top notch, and I loved Blade Runner.
Arrival is excellent, especially because it feels like much more original. I actually don't know. It's based on something, is it not?
It's based on a short story by David Chang. Yeah. The short story is fantastic, by the way, if you ever get a chance to read it.
Well, I will have to now. But I mean, it feels more original, at least like, to somebody who didn't know that. So it felt more original. So it's like I almost want to score that on its own. But I really enjoyed Blade Runner. Blade Runner is a more complete story. I thought a lot of his choices for the world building were really cool, especially because he makes it like a realistic future.
Yeah.
And also like he knows when to, and actually he does that in this as well, but That's something that I think Villeneuve is really good at, where sometimes he knows when to go big and he knows when to keep it simple and go small. And I think the choice there is like in the first movie for like Dune, he goes really big because he's like trying to sell you on this. In the second movie, he doesn't feel like he has to as much. Like there's a few shots like when they show the pool of that the Fremen have of all their like life water, like that's really like some really cool shots like that. And the like final battle scene and stuff like that. But the first one's all big shots. And then in like Blade Runner, he's got some city shots, exteriors, the gigantic like holographic advertisements and things like that. And then the climax of the movie, the final battle, is shot on this like
it's like a bulkhead. It's like a little transport vehicle. Yeah,
it's not even like a beach. It's like it's a spillway of a dam. It's nothing. But it's just like he knows when it's like this moment. You need no distractions and you remove everything from it. So he's really good at knowing those things. So yeah, I would say like for me, probably Blade Runner ranks at the top. And then maybe I might honestly put Dune, at least part 1, over anything else that he's done, like Arrival, and then maybe Arrival, and then maybe Dune 2.
So just a correction. So Arrival's based on Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang. You can, I think you can find the story online. I think it's free. That's how I found it anyway, but it's an excellent read if you ever get a chance. But anyway, Robert, your thoughts on...
So wait, are we ranking like within Villeneuve's filmography or within sci-fi movies as a genre?
No, just within his filmography. If we were talking about sci-fi, we'd be here all day.
Yeah. Oh boy.
I'm with Matt. I think Blade Runner is like top notch for me. And then part 1 of Dune over part 2. Arrival just doesn't have the action-oriented stuff that I want to see from sci-fi sometimes, but it's an excellent story, excellent film.
Yeah, I mean, they're all so close to each other that like I have a really hard time, you know, like they may all be tied for number 1 in his filmography for me because being sci-fi, I like them a lot. I would go to them for a rewatch sooner than I would rewatch, say, Prisoners or Enemy or Incendie or some of his earlier stuff. But yeah, like I think your rankings are pretty much consistent with my own. Like I love Blade Runner 2049. That's probably number 1. Arrival's like equal, but like just in there, number 2, and then part 1, part 2. But yeah, it's a heartbreaker.
Blade Runner was not a flop, but it was financially disappointing.
Yes,
I think and then he does Dune, and it's a huge success. And then he does Dune 2, and it's like a fairly moderate to big success. I saw it had to make like $500-600 million to break even, something like that. And I think it's well on its way, but hasn't passed that already. But really interesting that they couldn't make Blade Runner work. Is it just that like that Dune just didn't, or not Dune, sorry, Villeneuve didn't have the chops like to be like a guy who's like movies that people are going to go see? Like, what is it that makes Blade Runner not work as well as Dune? Because you cannot tell me, again, sorry to be sounding like an elitist, but the popcorn munching masses are like, ooh, Frank Herbert's like, 1966 novel Dune. Like, nobody cares. Like, the modern moviegoer doesn't really care about that, and they certainly have no affinity for David Lynch's Dune. Like, they don't care. So it's like, what is that? Like, what is it that makes the difference? They're both like pretty fairly hard sci-fi in a way.
I think it's one of those almost like at the risk of like sitting on the fence, it's an unknowable kind of question, because I think about like the phenomenon that was Barbenheimer. Like, on paper, a movie like Oppenheimer should not be in the same league as Barbie in terms of financial success. That was a movie that was made for a pretty modest budget for a Christopher Nolan film and outperformed it by a factor of like 8 or 9. And so I think people can get kind of caught up in a moment. The word of mouth is more powerful than people realize. And, if not enough people are plugged in with the source material, or if it's just a weird time of the year, like there's so many weird factors that are like impossible to track that go into like whether or not something does well at the box office. And people are always trying to like infer things. Hollywood has never gotten good at predicting what's going to do well. Like, you know, on paper, the Marvels last fall should have been an easy win for Disney, and yet it wasn't. So
I think a lot of it's pre-release hype. I think people understood what they were going to get from Dune, and I think the cast helped. Like Zendaya and Chalamet are probably two of the like most popular young actors in Hollywood right now. With Blade Runner, I don't think people really understood what to expect.
It's a legacy quell, so it's like, you know, you see Harrison Ford on the poster and you see Ryan Gosling and you're like, okay, I know that Harrison Ford was in the original Blade Runner, but like, what's he bringing to the table here? And like, you know, was the performance of Blade Runner 2049 foreshadowing for like Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny underperforming? Like, how much interest is there out there for a legacy star to kind of come back to the franchise that they defined, you know?
Because I remember reading this review about Blade Runner, and it was a great review and the critic really loved it. But he said one of the biggest emotions that he got from Blade Runner was a sense of relief that, okay, he can actually do this. Whereas with Dune, it's like, oh, I can't wait to see what he does. I can't wait to see this story. With Blade Runner.
You're talking about Villeneuve.
Yeah. And with Blade Runner, at the time, I think given the original movie's like sort of split reaction with so many different versions and Harrison Ford's own words about it, I just think there was a lot of trepidation. I think people just were like, I'm a little wary of this. I don't know how it's going to work.
Yeah.
And at the time, I don't remember if Ryan Gosling was a big, huge draw like he is now, because at the time, I think he just came off Drive and he did The Notebook, which were like successful movies, but like more like niche films, you know, smaller budget things. I think
he's he certainly did not have some of his like more all around stardom like he has now, because now that he's done some comedies and he's done some more like accessible hits like The Notebook, because then after The Notebook, like they try to make Ryan Gosling the like romantic lead, which I think he's fine in because I think he's a great actor. But now I was saying to the folks I watched the like Oscars with, I think he's really going to come into his moment in his career, because finally now people are like, oh, he can sing and dance and he's like a comedic actor and he can be dramatic and he's handsome and he's got all these things. Oh, great. Like he's what we need. And he's like at this kind of like perfect age for like to be like this so I agree with you. I think he's come more into his own, honestly. Like maybe now after having this short discussion, maybe the answer is Harrison Ford is he's such a bad promoter of movies.
Not a good actor anymore.
Actually, I will go to bat for him on that. I think that is some of his best acting in the last 2 decades. Blade Runner, I think again that's being put under a good director and being given source material that he feels very strongly about Blade Runner, like because he got, you know, he was kind of like jerked around so much on the original Blade Runner, but you know, it's like I think he wanted to go back and kind of like make good a little bit, and as I said, like being in the hands of a really competent director with Villeneuve really helped. But he's such a bad promoter. He doesn't care about marketing. He's over it. Like you watch him in his press junket stuff for Star Wars. Watch him on his press junket stuff for Indiana Jones. He's terrible. He doesn't care. It's like he's very much like, I'm just here so I don't get fined.
Oh
and
my
it's
god.
Like, and the energy is there. And honestly, I think people like, you know, I think people can really kind of sense that. Not that I think those press junkets really make a huge difference when it comes to a movie, but like he ain't going on Hot Ones. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So unlike some of the rest of the cast, like doing stuff like Hot Ones, doing stuff like that show where that lady interviews you on a chicken date. Like doing those kinds of like modern YouTube press junket type things. Those were done for Dune. It's the whole reason why they delayed part 2 is because they couldn't promote it. So, which was, I thought at the time, I was like, who cares? Like, do you really need to promote Dune? But now I'm like, okay, I'm kind of glad they did, because now at least Dune is financially successful enough where if Villeneuve chooses to make a third one, they're gonna make it happen. But I feel like if he doesn't like force it forward, it's probably not going to happen, which is, I think, Jason, I think you'll agree, is a good thing. I think this is something we can say to wrap up like Dune as a like franchise. We'll pretend that it's ending here, but like and it's something I said from the moment of the first one. I was like, man, thank God this got into the hands of somebody with some vision, in terms of like he had an idea of what he wanted it to be and he made it like that. It's not this does not feel like a movie made by, or two movies I should say, made by committee. This feels like a director with a vision and a plan from day one. This felt very much like, however much I can say about it that's critical or in praise, it feels like he had a plan from day one. He followed it, and he was given the funds and the time and the resources to execute, and he like absolutely nailed it. Like, this is absolutely two movies I will watch probably every few years over and over and over again.
All right. I think that does it for this episode then.
Yeah. Well, thanks to you, Matt, for coming on the show and bouncing ideas back and forth with us. It was it's always fun to do this, and who knows, like
we'll do this for part 3 in 10 years time.
No, thank you so much again for having me a non-expert back. But it was a lot of fun again. And I even was able to, I think I bet you've even done it on the first one. I got to talk about 1992 Westwood Studios Dune 2.
All right, well, thank you so much for listening to this episode, everyone, and until the next one, my name is Robert Snow in Toronto,
and my name is Jason Chen in Vancouver. Thank you, Matt Whalen, for coming on, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks again.
The Extra Buttery Podcast is written, recorded, and produced by Jason Chen and Robert Snow. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to rate and subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. And remember, popcorn is always better with extra butter.